Good afternoon. I'm Cole Szymanski, and welcome to The Edge. Technology has played a large role in most of our lives ever since we were little. Although technology has had a lot of positives, it can also have its downfalls. Many kids have known technology their entire lives, which has caused a decrease in socialization among teens. According to Orleans Marketing Group, about 40% of the world's population uses the internet, which is approximately 3.8 billion people. Of those 3.8 billion people, about 95% of those teens between the ages of 12 to 17 spend time online. Technology has been decreasing the quality of real-life conversations, especially with teenagers. Conversations where a person pulls out their phone makes the other person feel less connected to the person that they are talking to. And whenever one person does not feel included in the conversation, the quality of that conversation starts to suffer. Teenagers also tend to gain confidence behind a screen or keyboard. By that, I mean that they will say things they would not normally say in person or fabricate a story. This shows whenever someone is a lot different in person rather than their Twitter profile. All of a sudden, this person is not as interesting as they make themselves out to be. Teenagers tend to be a lot different online than they would be in a room full of peers or adults, because anything can be said online to make it seem like the truth. It has also caused the inability for teens to read social cues and have empathy towards others. Because conversations are only held through texting and they can't see the person that they are talking to unless speaking face to face. Teens usually don't practice having real conversations unless they're forced to, like in school or at home. Most kids would not pick up on a person fidgeting their fingers or a tone change in their voice and associate that with that person being anxious or stressed. The decreasing inability to read social cues has been rising due to more and more conversations being held over text rather than in person. Teenagers have also taken the trade of being a better multitasker rather than having a longer attention span. The average teenage attention span of teenagers has decreased from 12 seconds to 8 seconds in the past decade. They have a harder time filtering out the irrelevant stimuli and are too distracted by their phones. I learned that trying to have a conversation with someone that checks their phone every couple of seconds is one of the most frustrating tasks on the planet. I get the impression that whatever they are checking for is more important than the conversation we are having. Nowadays, everyone needs to know what is going on all the time and they don't want to miss a thing. Teenagers are always connected, whether it's through social media, texting, or even games on their phone or computer. Having all of these sources at your fingertips has caused a sense of online importance in teens and always being connected rather than engaging in real-life conversations. Today, I'm joined by Mr. John Goode, who is a teacher at Peters Township High School. So, Mr. Goode, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Cole. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming. And let's get right down to it. So, how has technology affected the environment in your classroom?
So I would say in my classroom, the technology has made things easier for students in some ways. So taking notes, being organized, turning in assignments has really made things a lot easier with computers and with technology. On the flip side, though, technology has also been a distraction in the classroom as well. So students cannot go a whole period without using their phones or checking their phones. When they're checking their phones, they're not listening to what's going on in class. They're not talking to their peers. They're not collaborating with other people on projects. So there's been benefits and drawbacks to having technology in the classroom.
Why would you think that, like you said earlier, that the teenagers they're now checking their phones? Why would you say that they always have that sense now of always checking them?
I would say it's more of a feeling of importance that they always want to know what's going on elsewhere. That they're interested in what their friends are doing, but chances are what their friends are doing is probably just as boring as what they're doing in class. So I think it's a feeling of importance. A feeling that I didn't have growing up in high school, really.
And why do you think that younger generations seem to make that a priority?
I think they make it a priority because a lot of their friends are doing it, and because they have the ability to talk to their friends in their classes, which is something I didn't have growing up and in high school. So I think because the technology is there, because their friends are using it, because society itself is emphasizing technology, I think we see a lot more technology use as a result.
And would you say that teenagers now kind of fear real-life conversations?
I would say in a lot of cases they do. People are very hesitant to pick up the phone and call someone. Even in our school, for example, I've had students come up to me, can you order me pizza after school? I have wrestling practice and I need to order pizza. Why can't you order pizza?
Yeah.
People are very hesitant to pick up the phone and make a call and converse with other people. Even in class, like let's just say in class a minute or two early. Back when I was in high school, we would talk to the person next to us. We'd talk about sports, what we were doing that weekend, what have you. But today, your generation, 2 minutes are left in class, or they have an extra 2 minutes of time. They're on their phone texting, they're playing a game. They're not conversing with one another like I used to back in the day.
And would you say what the conversations, or the quality of the conversations, I should say, have changed from, instead of, like you said, having conversations with your friends whenever you were in high school, do you think those type of conversations have shifted to like a new meaning?
I think they've gotten shorter to a large extent.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like our conversations are as deep or as thorough. They're relatively short in nature and relatively quick, we'll say, for lack of a better description. But we would always run out of time in high school to talk to each other, and we'd want more time, but that really doesn't seem to be the case in school today. That our conversations are pretty short and to the point, and there's that awkward silence where we're using technology and we're doing other things that are a little different than what I was used to growing up.
Yeah. And how would you say that that teenagers could get better at this? Does it just take practice?
I would say it's practice. It's putting yourself in positions to be social, getting involved in extracurricular clubs, putting yourself in those positions, I think is important to practice those skills, to learn those skills, to hone those skills. So I'd say just putting yourself out there and putting yourself in social situations as well, trying new things, trying to meet new people.
And why would you say that putting yourself out there is a lot harder now than it was back in the day with like technology increasing? Because I feel like that's a main reason why people are starting to fall behind the phone, is because they don't want to put themselves out there. Would you say that technology has played a factor into that?
I'd say technology has definitely played a factor into that. That wasn't an option when I was growing up. So you either conversed person to person, face to face, or you didn't. But now with technology, you have two different options. You can talk to people in person, face to face. You can network and communicate, or you can go on your phone. So I guess it's provided a different avenue basically for communication that we didn't have available to us. I think that fear of rejection as well, with talking to people that you're not familiar with, is another factor. If you are on your phone and you're talking to someone else, it's someone that you already know, it's someone you're going to get a positive response from. But if it's someone that you just met in class, you might not be as likely to get that positive response.
And how can adults help sort of stray teenagers away from that sense of using their phones?
I think a lot of it comes from finding a balance between technology and different applications for communication. So in the classroom, I think it involves getting kids involved in projects where they have to collaborate, they have to work together. It involves getting them into extracurricular activities where they have to practice teamwork, they have to show leadership skills and other things like that. I think that's a big part of getting kids to practice those skills, is putting them in opportunities basically and giving them opportunities to practice their communication skills without really using technology.
So you'd say it's pretty detrimental to develop that balance early on?
I would say it definitely is. Growing up, kids today have more technology than they ever have in the elementary classroom, at home, everywhere you go basically. So I would say finding that balance early on and just striking that balance between talking face to face and working on your communication skills and using technology, I think is a challenge for everyone.
Yeah, and how do you think that would set teenagers up for the future if they develop that balance earlier?
I think it would give them a better skill set to succeed in the real world, because so much of what goes on in the real world is about communication, it's about people, it's about relationships. Being knowledgeable, having content knowledge and other things like that are important, but an inability to communicate won't get you too far in life. It's very difficult to lead people when you can't communicate, when you can't converse, when you aren't likable, and you have to have good communication skills to really advance in the real world.
And how can someone gain those skills by themselves instead of having someone else do it for them?
So as far as gaining those skills independently, I guess, I would say it's just a matter of putting yourself in a position to practice those skills, joining Future Business Leaders Club, joining Photography Club, whatever it happens to be. It's putting yourself in positions where you have to be social and you have to step outside your boundaries and communicate with others.
And do you think there should be consequences for people that do tend to use technology too much?
I think there are consequences that, will show later in life. People who don't have communication skills that are as good as their peers won't advance as far in the workplace. So should there be formal consequences? I don't necessarily think, but in the long run there will be consequences, whether they realize that or not.
Do you have any consequences for students that tend to use their phones too much? I know I've never personally had you as a teacher, but from what I've heard, I would love to. I would love to. But do you have any consequences for people that?
As far as consequences go, sure, I'll take phones if they're becoming a distraction in class. I have no problem taking a phone. I have a flip phone myself, so it's always cool to get my hands on the newest iPhone and see what it's about. Kids try to get me to buy the iPhone and other things like that. They're like, "Don't you want one of those?" I'm like, "No, I actually don't. I like my flip phone." Yeah. So, I'll definitely take the phone in class, and if it becomes a problem, we can send a disciplinary referral down to the office.
Okay. And as a teacher, whenever someone approaches you and asks you a question or tries to have a conversation with you, how can you tell if that person is struggling to maintain the conversation? Like, does technology play a factor into that?
I think if they're struggling to maintain the conversation, they'll go to their phone.
Yeah.
They'll sort of run out of ideas and they'll sort of withdraw from the conversation basically via technology. So I would say that's a typical route if they're having trouble, is that go to your phone. You can still do something, and rather than be in the conversation, it's a different avenue to take, I guess.
And how are some ways that you can tell if a person is struggling with the conversation? Like,
I think in general they just have a lack of commentary, lack of things to say. You see them looking elsewhere. You see them thinking of other things. You see them trying to get out of the conversation and other things like that, if possible.
And how would you say that social media has played a factor into decreasing socialization among teens?
I would say social media just gives teens another avenue basically to socialize and to talk with other people. So it's a lot easier to text and to be on social media as opposed to picking up the phone and calling someone and having a conversation. So I think it's just given students and teenagers another avenue for communication that in a lot of cases I think is a lot easier to navigate.
And why would you say that? I know, at least for me, I could probably speak for a lot of my peers, that we put a pretty hard emphasis on our Twitter accounts and Instagram accounts. Why do you think that has played such a big part in basically becoming who we are as people?
Why has it played a big part? That's a good question. I think a lot of it has to do with society. You see people that are celebrities and other things, and they have a Twitter. The President of the United States has a Twitter and tweets frequently. So I think a lot of people, mimic what people they respect do. So your favorite athletes on Twitter, they have an Instagram, they have other social media. You want to be like them. You want to have that as well. So I think that plays a big role in that. And I think it also gives you a feeling of self-importance that, people are looking at your Instagram and your Twitter, even though some people might not really be looking at it. It makes you feel like you're important, makes you feel like you are someone, which of course you are, and you are an important person.
Thank you.
But, I think it makes you feel important in many ways.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for this first segment of The Edge. Tune right back in. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Edge. So, Mr. Goode, let's go back into the social media topic of it. So why would you say that teenagers now typically tend to go more towards Instagram or Twitter instead of Facebook or MySpace, like how it was back in the early 2000s?
That's a good question. I would say a lot of it has to do with what people in popular culture are doing. So going back to President Trump, going back to a number of sports figures, public figures, a lot of them are using Twitter and Instagram as opposed to Facebook and MySpace, and I think a lot of that has to do with what other people do. Why do you think so?
Would you say I probably think so because it's just something new. Like,
Okay.
I know that teenagers now are always looking for the new thing. We're always looking to stay involved, and it does have to deal with whatever your friends are doing. So I know if all my friends are getting this new account on new app or whatever, I want to do it too. I want to be involved.
Yeah.
So I think that does have a big part of it, is that like we always just want to be involved in everything, and no matter even if it is a pretty stupid idea, like some of the social media apps are now, but for some reason it just sucks us in.
Yeah.
And then once it sucks you in, you just have to stay with it. And then with a lot of people, I mean, now it's also a good way for people to get jobs. Like, you have Instagram models. People get paid for Twitter. I don't know if you knew that or not. So
no, I didn't.
It's just like it creates, I mean, that's not the main reason, but like I just think that once you get in so far, you just have to stay there.
Yeah.
All right. So why would you say a big part of it has to do with just your parents being on it? Because I know that's a big part of it. Like if my mom has a Facebook, I don't want to be like, oh, I don't want a Facebook either. Like my mom has that. It's for old people.
Yeah.
So would you say that like it has to deal with like the older generation sort of going towards the, I guess you could say, new technology or new social media to get people to stray away from it?
I guess younger generations like yours and mine, are more attracted to, we'll say, newer media.
Yeah.
If our mom and dad or our grandparents are on Facebook doesn't sound too cool anymore. Like you don't want to, have your grandma checking your Facebook or your social media accounts. You want to be somewhere else.
Yeah.
You want to sort of have your own thing. So, if you look at companies like Twitter and Instagram, for example, that are, we'll say, newer than Facebook, I think you see popularity there increasing. Just because younger people and younger generations are more attracted to that, and older generations are attracted to older types of social media that have been around for a longer period of time.
Yeah. And why do you think that popularity is so important?
In what regard?
Because I feel like we were just talking about with like parents and stuff, and no one wants to be associated with their parents because I guess, or grandparents or family, because I feel like they want to be better in a way than them, I should say.
Okay.
So do you feel like that plays any part into it?
I think it plays a small role, that we want to have something, as a younger generation, something newer, better, more modern, I guess, as opposed to what our parents and grandparents, for that matter, are doing with technology. So I think that's a big draw to it.
And how do you think social media can later affect your, I should say, post-college, post-high school life with like getting a job or regards to that?
So I think social media has a big impact on that. You look in popular media today, and you look at, a number of public figures. Once you put something out there on social media, on the internet, it's there forever. Whether it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, if it was on there, someone's going to find out about it.
I don't know if you saw, but like with the whole Guardians of the Galaxy thing with James Gunn, I think that's his name. I don't know. He
was one of the writers.
Yeah, one of the writers, director. He just sent out tweets out there from, 9 years ago, and then they got a hold of him, and it just ruined his life. So I mean, I guess that just plays a big part into it, is that like anything that's out there is permanently out there.
Yeah, so I think it's something to be mindful of, especially for your generation, like, what you're putting out there, because what might be cool today or what you might think is funny today might not be funny 10 years from now. So I think you always need to be mindful of that. And you take a look at accountability. You're accountable for everything. What you did when you were a kid in high school still matters 10, 15, 20 years later. So I think it's, social media can be great, but you have to be very, very careful how you use it.
Do you think social media can affect your social skills with communicating with actual people?
I think in some cases, yeah. I think a lot of people that spend too much time on social media, on technology, on their phones, aren't as social. They don't have as good of communication skills as people who spend more time conversing like you and I today. So I think that plays a big role. You go into a job interview, on paper you're qualified, but can you converse with other people? Can you build a positive rapport? Can you communicate? Can you clearly articulate your ideas? That's a huge part of it. And if you can't do that, it's not going to matter how good your resume is. It's not going to matter how good your grades are. It's not going to matter what type of content knowledge you have.
So you would say how the way teenagers text does end up affecting your social skills, instead of sending "are you up" with just using the "are you" and then "up." So you'd say that, would you say to practice texting, because I guess there's not really any way to get teens to stop texting, practice texting the way you should be speaking?
I don't know if I'd go that far. I mean, how people text each other is, I guess, up to them. But I see in the classroom that sometimes people mistakenly use texting language in class assignments. So rather than, write out YOU for you, people sometimes mistakenly but just put the letter U, which is, not the best thing to see in an assignment, because it's a much more formal atmosphere. It's a much more formal assignment that shouldn't, include that type of language. But sometimes people are doing it so often, they make mistakes like that.
So how have grades been affected since the rise of technology? Like, were grades before all the rise of social media and technology better than how they are today?
It would be a little difficult for me to say, since I've been around for, the social media generation, I guess.
That's true, yeah.
So I've been teaching since 2008. So I've been teaching for a little over 10 years now. So technology and social media has always been around in that time. we'd have to go further back to
Yeah.
really see the big difference between before social media and after social media has basically come on the scene,
Yeah.
to see where things have gone. But I definitely notice that kids that are on their phones more tend to
Yeah.
be less social. They don't tend to communicate as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are all important factors to consider and to be aware of.
And would you say that phone calls are better than sending out a text message instead?
I think for certain instances, yes. I feel like I can accomplish a lot more in a call
Yeah.
than I can via a text message. So on my flip phone, for example, I have to type letter by letter. I can't. It takes
Yeah.
me a while to type out a text message. Sometimes it's so much easier just to pick up the phone and call.
Yeah.
And to communicate with someone and have that conversation as opposed to go back and forth, text.
Yeah.
You can accomplish so much more in 90 seconds or less. How do you feel about your conversations with your peers in social media? Do you
With
think
my peers in with me and my friends, I know that, for instance, like it does make it a lot easier. I do admit that, because if I forget something, I try to text a friend and it's like they're not answering. What am I supposed to do? So I send them a DM on Instagram,
Yeah.
maybe DM them on Twitter too, and it's like, hey, like, I need this. So I guess it does give a sense of urgency in a way, but also it just kind of affects, because it just kind of affects like an all-around environment. Because I would probably rather be texting someone I know on my phone walking down the hallway instead of trying to like meet someone new, I guess, and trying to
Yeah.
put myself out there. I guess it's just a sense of comfort in me.
Yeah.
So I guess, I mean, I don't know. I don't think that's just with me. I feel like that's just a generational issue in general.
Right.
That was really weirdly worded. But anyway, how would you say social media, or not social media, but technology has affected you and your friends? Because you are a little bit older than me, so.
Well, just a bit.
Yeah, just a
About
little
10
bit.
years older, somewhere in that range.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but would you say it's played a bigger impact on my friends my age than people more your age? Because you guys were still like that whole technology era too.
Yeah, we were more of a Facebook generation
that's true.
than a Instagram, Twitter generation. So I'd say social media has had some impact on relationships. A lot of guys stay in contact, via social media, via group message and other types of technology like that. So I'd say it's played some role in, changing relationships. For a lot of us that work, that have jobs, that have, a wife and kids, other things like that, it's just another way for us to stay in contact with each other, which has, benefits and drawbacks as well.
And how are some ways that those relationships have changed? Like, have you become closer with more of those friends, or have you become more distant from some of them?
I would say in some ways we become more distant,
Yeah.
because a lot of people think that, if you communicate via social media that you're still in contact.
Yeah.
But you don't feel that same connection as if you meet the person face to face and talk with them and go to a party with them, or do something along those lines. Go play hockey with the boys, something like that. That to me is where the real relationships are. The people that I'm the closest with are the people
Yeah.
that I spend the most time with in person. So some of my friends that I play hockey with, we go to the gym. We go out to eat. We play hockey together at least once a week, sometimes
Yeah.
twice a week. But those are the people I have the best relationships with. The people that I stay in contact with through technology, through texting, other types of technology, I don't feel we're nearly as close as we once were.
And why is that face-to-face connection so important?
I think just in life in general, and in the business world, or for that matter, even in teaching, that building those relationships, talking with someone face to face, communicating is absolutely critical. Being the smartest teacher is good, but if you can't communicate, if you can't build relationships with students, if you can't be likable, you're not going to get too far, to be quite honest. So I think that face-to-face communication is really, really important. The best teachers are some of the best communicators as well, I think.
And now to try to kind of change the subject a little bit, do you think that there is an age too young to try for kids to start using technology?
That's difficult to put a specific age number on it, because I feel like whether parents expose their kids to it or not, kids are going to be exposed in some way, shape, or form to technology. But I think it's just a matter of finding balance, finding moderation in whatever you're doing.
And would you put all that responsibility on the parents as the kids growing up, or does the child have to take some responsibility for their own?
I would put it on both the parents and the child as well. Obviously, as the child gets older and becomes more mature and more aware of what's going on, he or she has to take some responsibility for their use of technology. But it's also up to the parents to set limits and to help their son or daughter find that balance between technology and face-to-face communication.
And why do you think that parents usually aren't really fans of it? Because I know like they didn't really grow up with it in their generation, but sometimes they're just as bad as teenagers. So why do you think that they tend to have a shorter temper with it than teenagers usually are with one another?
That's a good question. I don't know. What do you think, Cole?
Honestly, I just think it's because it's so new and because the relationships they had with their parents were very, very face-to-face. There wasn't really very little phone calling. The only way to communicate with someone was to actually talk to them. One of the only ways. I mean, they could have wrote letters or something, but I doubt anyone sent a pigeon, but I doubt anyone did that. But I just feel like they just had that face-to-face connection with their parents that they want us to have it with them. And whenever it's not there, they don't like that too much, because I mean, it kind of stinks whenever you're trying to talk to your son or daughter and all they're doing is just texting or taking a selfie for Snapchat. So I mean, I guess it just, I don't know, I guess it just kind of hurts them to see their kids not really associate or communicate with them too.
Yeah. I think the change is definitely difficult. You know, they go from growing up a certain way, and then seeing you guys grow up a little differently. That that change and that shift has been difficult for some of them to accept and to ultimately, be accepting of, I guess.
All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Technology, however, is not all bad. It does have positives, and it is a great way to communicate with friends or family. Help make learning easier or more accessible and share information in a matter of seconds, but it starts to become a problem when it's overused and relied upon for many things. My generation has grown up with major advances in technology and has had it always acceptable for us, maybe even too acceptable. Technology has strayed humanity away from having quality conversations, being able to read people and empathize with what they're saying, and ultimately shortened our average attention span during conversations. If you have a problem with technology and want to know how to improve your social skills, please visit the Center for Internet and Technology Addiction at virtual-addiction.com. I would like to thank Mr. Goode for joining me on this episode of The Edge. Make sure to tune in to the next episode of The Edge. Have a great day.